user cannot provide access for his application to any specific SharePoint site. This is done by SharePoint administrator. It could be done using Graph API. So under sites, permissions. So that's an entry point to get, list, create, update, delete site permissions. So you can see that to update site permissions, you need application with sites.full-control.all permissions. Alternatively, you can do the same with PowerShell using pnp.PowerShell module. And you can see there are some commands. For example, grant command. So using PNP PowerShell module, you can do the same. You can provide for specific application permissions to the specific site. And this is where automation comes, because surely as SharePoint admin, you can do these actions upon every user request, but that might be time consuming. So can we automate this? Sure. I will show you this quick demo how user can use this automation solution. And then I'll describe the solution architecture and details how the solution is built. But this is the front end, just regular SharePoint site. And under the SharePoint site, there is a list. And this list works as an intake list. So here any user can create new list item, and this list item would be considered as an intake request for this automation process. So as a regular user, what I would do is I would create a new request, and as target site URL, I would use my site. As application ID, I would use client ID that I just of the application I just registered. So here I can select what permissions, kind of permissions I need, and that's it. Of course, this is just a demo to show you the concept. In production, you would probably make some improvements, like you would not accept request from any user, but you would require approval from users, from target site administrator, for example, right? So you would implement here some kind of approval process. You would probably update user experience using some Power Platform features like Canvas apps, so to make it more user-friendly. But yeah, this is just a demo. Front end is, as you can see, just a SharePoint site and list. As the backend, I use Azure Functions, and let me show you the backend. Here you can see what is the backend look like. For the backend, you would need Azure subscription, where you create Azure function, and Key Vault. For Azure function to run, you would need an application registered, but this time that would be your admin application. So you need directory read access, and site is full control, Graph API and SharePoint AI permission. So that's an admin application. I will not be talking how to create Azure Function or Key Vault. I will just share some details. For example, when you created your Azure Function, you would need to generate or to enable your function identity here. By default, identity is off, so I turned it on and save it. So I got object. When you create a key vault, when you create a key vault to store your credentials, you would need for this key vault to provide access so your Azure function can access your key vault. So here I added role, and let me just share with you. Yeah. So for this, for Azure function, I provided Key Vault reader and Key Vault secret user access to this Key Vault. Also, I provided access for myself to this Key Vault. And then I uploaded a certificate to this Key Vault. So here you can see certificate. And this certificate I'll be using to authenticate against SharePoint tenant. Now that's the function code. What I would show you is this function is scheduled to run every 5 minutes by default. This function is timer triggered, so it just runs on scheduled basis. And what I need in this function is two modules, two PowerShell modules, AZ and PNP PowerShell. This function is PowerShell function, yes. And here is the code. It's not perfect code, but again, created just for you to have an idea. The good thing is I can work on the code on my dev machine using VS Code, and I can debug and run this code on local machine, and the same code will be running in Azure. So let me show you and go through the code. So I'm just validating modules I imported, and I specify key vault name you've seen just recently and certificate name. So even key vault name and certificate name, and having permissions, my personal permissions to Key Vault and this function permissions to Key Vault, this code will be able to pull certificate from Key Vault. And let me prove it. Yes, so I was able on the fly to get certificate. Now I want to authenticate to tenant as an administrator. That they should be very familiar for you. To authenticate, I'm using client ID and certificate put on the fly from Azure Key Vault. And let me run this piece of code. And yes, I authenticated, so I can prove it to you running this part of code. Okay, all good. Now I use just regular SharePoint site as a front end, and I created with GUI list and updated it. But here I just hard-coded list ID for me to easy access this list. So let me run this code. I got connection to intake site. Now during development I could get list and all the fields. So now I can see these fields. And you can see custom fields I created for this case. So title field, I rename it to target site URL. And I created app ID, permissions, automation output. You might improve the solution, like this request status and so on. And again, script is very simple. You would definitely in production add validations to the script. But yeah, I just kept it simple. Script takes items, all the items from this list. And currently there are items. And here, yeah, I do not use request status. I'm just all the intake requests, and I'm filtering out intake request with existing automation comment. So I consider items without comments as new items. And here is a loop for each item. What I would do is I want to get application from Azure to get application name, because when I provide permissions to specific SharePoint site for application, I don't know why, but they want me to provide application name also. Okay, so here I'm pulling application name from Azure Active Directory based only on client app ID. So app ID that what user provided to us, and here application name that what we got from Azure Active Directory. You know what? Let me get another application, last one. The one that my user just submit. Yeah, that's the one. And let me do the same. So yeah, here I got application name. Next, I'm checking. Yeah, here I'm just getting what kind of request and target site URL. And here I'm connecting to the target site to get site ID. The ID is required to provide permission. So here I got site ID. Now, depending on what kind request is. So if request is just to report site permissions, I'm using PNP PowerShell. I'm pulling all the permissions provided to site. Like all application permissions will be here. And raw permissions looks like that. So to provide this object, to share this object with user, I'm just converting this raw permissions into plain text here. And I'm assigning this text to some field in this list. So this is how I communicate from backend to frontend. If the request type is provision permissions, I'm checking what kind of role is required, and I'm I just use PowerShell to grant permissions for application with this display name. That what was I talking about, the required display name. By the way, user can change application display name later, but that would not be reflected here. To which site, and again, I'm just converting raw permissions into more user-friendly format to update intake list with the result. If the request type is remove, what I'm doing is I'm getting all the permissions that are provided to the site, and out of these permissions, I'm selecting only permissions specified, the permissions provided to application specified in the intake list. So I revoke one specific application permissions here. And basically that's it. Yeah. So I pushed this code to Azure Function, and it runs every 5 minutes. And let me check what's happening on the user end. Yeah, on the user end, we can see that our request is taken care of and permissions were provided. Now let me try another. Request. So this time for the same site, I would just request permissions. Okay, I save my request that I'll wait another 5 minutes, but meantime, let me try to access the same site with the same credentials. Check would work or not. Oh, okay, we are good. You can see that now I can access the site programmatically. And let me try to get a list of site lists. Yeah, you can see it. So now you can see that we can do whatever we want with site from now on, right? Even write permissions. You can probably implement here not only read but full control permissions. You know, that's part of our Site.Selected options. Yeah, so let me pause for a minute to get data on applications permissions to this specific site. Okay, fast forward, you can see that backend application updated this field with some data like application ID and permissions. So you can, so I know what applications got what kind of permissions to my site. Alrighty, that's almost the end. The only probably I'll share with you is if you just search for Site.Selected permissions provisioning automation, you'll find my blog article where I explain the same maybe in more detailed way. And from here you can get my code. There will be a link to GitHub. So that's probably it. Thank you all. Take care.